Okay, welcome. This is Citing Your Sources, Gathering Your Friends. It's a workshop that I've put together because of all the questions I get asked about citation. Sometimes people even get confused about what it is. Citations are usually what you get. A traffic citation is what takes you to court. It doesn't sound like a good thing, but I promise, these are the friendly kinds of citation. That's the reason that I advertised it with little pastel ponies today, because it really is a kindly thing that you can do for yourself. I like to think of it as gathering your friends. You're showing your readers that you aren't the only person who's ever had a thought. You're part of a tradition of thinking. You're also supporting your own claims with something that someone else has already done the legwork or research on. You're also helping people follow your train of thought. Sometimes that can help us figure out what research you've been using and where you might go next. And you're also just spicing up your work with a dialogue between yourself and people from the past who've written books, or even current people who are writing. So there are three places to cite, three citation situations. The first one is quoting exact words. The second is when you're paraphrasing an idea. And the third is when you use an idea that comes from a source you're consulting. I'll explain that in just a minute. Of course, proper citation is the way that you prevent plagiarism by giving your friends the proper credit and making it so that no one will take another person's idea for your own, using signals in punctuation and in citation. You must cite a source both when you quote it directly or when you paraphrase it. It's the idea that you're citing, not necessarily somebody's word choice. You can also use citations to point readers toward other sources that are relevant to your thoughts, but aren't necessarily things that you've quoted or paraphrased. This shows that you're familiar with the resources available, so that's that third category. It shows that you're familiar with what resources you can have. It's a sort of advanced citation technique because it's not required. You don't have to jump into the conversation, but it is a really good way of showing that you know what's out there and who else is talking about the ideas you're talking about. People all the time ask me whether or not they're citing the right amount. So most of the time when people aren't citing the right amount, they're citing too little. There are lots of dangers to citing too little. The most obvious is you're standing alone with nothing to back up your argument. You're just saying things without anybody helping you along. So even the most unique argument, even if you figure out the coolest thing that no one ever thought of, needs sources to back up its details. So of course those sources can take any number of forms, but they are things that you're going to use to back up what you've said. So if you've got an idea or a quote from someone else and you haven't cited it, of course you've plagiarized, and that's not good. But do cite whenever you can. Whenever you have the opportunity to cite, you need to do it, just to show that your idea has support. There's also a danger in citing too much. This is the other end of this here. Your voice gets drowned out by too much from other people. You're not making your own argument anymore. You're just reporting what other people have said without giving it any of your voice or making your own contribution. So one of the ways that I see the too much play out a lot is in the block quote. Okay? A block quote is simply where you have a quotation that takes up 4, or some styles have 5 lines or more, and usually that means that you indent it differently, you format differently, depending on the style that you're using. But what you basically do is use a giant chunk of text from someone else. Now, this can be really useful if what you need is to keep this exact quote in order to understand the integrity of the argument that's being made. But most of the time when people use it, you plunk down a big quote and you don't really give me the context or analyze it for me. So even if you give a big quote, you always have to give me why you're putting it in the paper and then explain it in detail after you put it in. In fact, every quote that you put in and paraphrases anytime you use other sources, you need to explain to your reader why you're using it. Okay, so when you're ready to cite, you need to figure out the proper style to use. There are several that we use here. I'll talk about the most common one last, but some people are familiar with MLA style. It's the Modern Language Association style. This is used in humanities research. So you may see this style in sources that you read that have to do with literary citation styles and things like that. This is MLA. Another one you may see often is the APA style. This is from the American Psychological Association, APA. This one is used when you're talking about psychological research, and it's very useful for people that are doing pastoral care and counseling. So those kinds of papers will often use APA style.
Can you go back one step and tell me what MLA stands for?
Modern Language Association.
Modern Language Association. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So this is the SBL Handbook of Style, the Society of Biblical Literature. So this style is very useful for when you're citing manuscripts or when you're using sort of older, obscure sources that deal with the Bible. So things like commentaries are also, they're easier to cite if you use the SBL style. But like other styles, the SBL style is based in the Chicago Manual of Style. This big chunk right here. So this is the Chicago Manual of Style. Okay, the Chicago Manual of Style is available free to you online as ILIV students if you go to the library website and go where it says Search Databases. There's a place that just says in large letters, Chicago Manual of Style Online. And this has all the text of this tome, which is great. However, for most student purposes, I actually suggest that you use Kate Turabian's. It's a manual for writers of research papers, theses, and dissertations, which is what you're up to. Sure.
If I have an older edition of that, would that still be correct?
Most of the time, the older edition is fine. The things that you want to pay attention to are online sources. The new edition has a lot more information about blogs and other things that are more detail. In other words, it'll give you more detail. But most things follow from the older edition. But yeah, if you ever have a problem with it, you can always check.
So 7th edition is the newest?
7th edition is the newest one. That's correct. Okay, so Kate Turabian, what she does is she takes the Chicago Manual of Style, which is written for people creating journals and publishing books, and she takes that style and actually makes it usable for a student. So this is what a student paper should look like. A lot of times when you're using the Chicago Manual, you'll notice things that talk about how to create a journal article. That's not quite what you're up to. You're actually doing student papers, right? Also, I just want to note that in the front, it has an excellent reference in the back. In other words, this is where all your, how to cite a book, an article, all those things are back here. But in the front part, she has a really nice course in how to write a paper. So if you ever sort of find yourself stuck, or you need a little bit of sort of refresher on maybe where to go, the front part of this book is really excellent. Okay, so once you've picked which style you're using, and I want to say too that you should always do that in consultation with a professor. So if you're unsure about which style to use, check with your professor and think a little about what you're writing about, what kind of sources you're going to encounter, and decide from there which style might serve you better. So if you're doing a lot of things with manuscripts, SBL style might help you out more. If you're doing a lot of things, if you're writing a paper that has to do with psychology or a pastoral care and counseling thing, you might cite a lot of things that APA style might do well. So that's what you do it. And that can help you pick too. You know what I mean? So once you've figured out what you want to do, what kind of information do you need to gather in order to cite properly? So for most everything, we need 4 pieces of information. We need authors, titles, dates, and publication information. Now, publication information, of course, depends a lot on what kind of publication you've got before you. Do you have a journal where you'll need to know the title of the journal, the volume that it's in? In other words, there's a whole list of things that you might need to know. For a book, generally, publication information is the city where it was published, and then the publisher's name itself. So you've got to make sure that as you're going, you're gathering all that information about your sources, just so you don't get stuck at the last minute and realize that you don't have everything you need to cite a source and have to go back. So a lot of people use a lot of web information. There's a lot of great information on the internet, but know that a URL or a website address is not a citation. A website needs essentially the same sorts of information that a book needs. We need to know as much as possible who wrote it and who they wrote it for. In other words, a lot of times people will cite websites that maybe have a group of authors, but we need to know who those authors are, and why they were writing these particular articles. Also, if you give us all the information that you can about who wrote it and what the titles are and how they wrote it, then if your link goes bad, if they move it around on the internet somewhere, then we can find it again. Whereas if you just give us a bad link, then it's lost. But how do you actually put that information into your document? There's 2 basic ways that we use. One style is called in-text citation, and the other is just called footnotes, or there are other names for it too we'll talk about in a second. Those are the 2 main styles that we usually use. There are certainly advantages and disadvantages to both styles, but again, it's a good idea to ask your professor which they prefer for a particular assignment. So, in-text style is sometimes called parenthetical citations. They're used in a style called reference list style. You need to know that, but that's what the overall thing is called. It means that the citation is written in shortened form in the document, inside parentheses. So you give usually the kinds of information that you have in parentheses are an author's name, a date, and a page number. Depending on the style, they may have different formats inside the parentheses. And then at the end of the document, you have a reference list that gives full, detailed information about all the styles that you used. A good key is to remember that the way that you would use the citations in a parenthetical style, you would look at the author's name in the parentheses and then head to the reference list. So the first thing you see on a reference list is the author's name on the left-hand side. So it's a nice, easy way to follow along.
Some more questions as we go? Or?
No, wait till the end. We'll hold out. Okay, so footnotes are used in what's called bibliography style. You put a superscript number at the end of a sentence that refers to a source. Then you cite the source in an actual footnote at the bottom of the page, so it has a corresponding number. So always use the tools that are provided in your writing software. Don't ever try to hand number your footnotes. All the styles that we use encourage you to do that. You can usually an insert footnote command on whatever writing program you're using. So use that, and if you need help figuring it out, please ask. The references that are found in footnotes use some very specific punctuation and styles that you have to follow in order to communicate them properly. At the end of your document, you have a bibliography that repeats all that same information, but in a different order. And it's important that you do it correctly, in other words, that you use the manuals, that you talk to us and figure out the right order and punctuation to use, because that order and punctuation is what communicates to your reader what you mean when you cite. Endnotes work pretty much the same as footnotes, but they come at the end of the document. Most readers here prefer that you use footnotes. It's an easier reading style. You just look at the top of in the body of the text, see a number, look to the bottom of the page, there it is. Sometimes if you have a lot of information in footnotes so that it gets sloppy and there's there's a whole page of nothing but footnotes, sometimes we'll ask you to move it and put everything at the end as endnotes. However, if you get to a point where that's the case, you may want to consider whether maybe some of that stuff that you've got in the footnotes actually belongs in the text, or maybe it doesn't belong in this paper. Maybe you're actually writing a separate paper in the footnotes. So people talk about a works cited or bibliography page. That's that reference list at the end of the document. Sometimes you'll be asked to make an annotated bibliography. I know some of you have done that in here. It uses the same formatting as a bibliography list, but then you put a summary of each document in the list. That can help you when you're starting an in-depth research project, and it can really assist you in gathering and figuring out who your friends are, right? So I hope all of this has been useful information for you. I'm going to take questions now, and I have two ways that you can also get questions answered if you think of them later or if you're on the internet. One way is there is a workshop page on our website, writing.ilif.edu, that will have a big list of all the links that I've found that are useful in figuring out citation styles, and also some handouts that give terribly in-depth information about all of this. There's also a discussion board on the Writing Lab website that is specifically devoted to citation questions. So if you have burning questions after this, or if you're on the internet and you have burning questions, be sure and ask it in that discussion board so we can answer it and everyone can see it. So thank you very much.